So we've gotten a lot of really good questions. I think what we will do is we'll invite all our speakers here. But to start with, we have questions specifically for Dr. Abadi that I will read, and you can come, and then the rest of the speakers can join, and I'll sort through the questions. Question is, could you please address the impact of recent statements from Trump appointees who have called Islam a political ideology? And another question on the same to you as well, which is, how can today's youth help spread the message of equality? Do we have boundaries as Muslims toward others? Boundaries. Yeah. I'll just leave this here.
Huh? Thank you for the questions, and again, thank you for having me here. In terms of the impact of the recent statements as a political ideology, I think this is one of the strategies of Islamophobia in general, that it is they said that it was a political ideology, that 70% or 80% of Muslims believe that want to demise the rest of the world. I mean, there were so many negative statements said about Islam. Islam is a religion. But this is why I said that when we fight Islamophobia, we need to fight it in the political terrain, because it becomes a political fight. It's not something that we can say is very much just something that we can take personally in behind closed doors and say, you know, it's just a statement. Many times when I'm talking on these issues in terms of Islamophobia in general, I get questions of, well, you know, there's a lot of extremists and a lot of extremists are Muslim. But there's a lot of extremists, just the fact that we say Muslim terrorist or Muslim extremist is in of itself very problematic term. Because there are so many Christian extremists or Christian terrorists or Jewish extremists, Jewish terrorists. So we need to make sure that we remove the adjective of religion when we are referring to specifically in terms of any type of extremist groups. When we look at Daesh, for example, we see that the #1 victims of Daesh and ISIS, and I study this, I work on these issues specifically. I came here actually to do a training on Daesh's recruitment and its propaganda. The #1 victims of Daesh and the people that have died have been Muslims. But the problem is that Muslims have been double victims. On the one hand, we've been victims of Islamophobes and such statements, and on the second, we've been victims to Daesh and extremist groups. So absolutely not. I mean, Islam is not a political ideology, it's a way of life, it's a religion, and I believe, I mean, my inspirer is Islam. This is what inspires me, which is more of a social justice religion, not just peace, which Islam means peace, but also a social justice, which tells me that I need to fight for people that are marginalized, not just my own religion. In terms of the second question, which is youth, I think our future lies within youth. They are the people that are, they are the leaders of tomorrow. I think youth are less jaded. Whenever I go to the classroom and I speak to college students, I get more energy. I get out and I'm like, I'm ready to fight again, I'm ready to take this, you know, they have brilliant ideas. And I think the youth have a very, very important role to play. And I think it's very important for us, the people, I'm not that old, but older people, to give the space to our youth to be able to come up with activities, do things outside of the box, make sure that it's normalized, that we open the news channel, for example, and we see a Muslim hijabi woman or non-hijabi or a Muslim young men and women inside our American mainstream media. We need to be able to populate these online spaces, and who knows best other than our youth. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Questions? Actually, the same question from both sides. One question from obviously a Muslim who's saying, how can we connect with other groups of faith in order to work together. And another question, I'm not a Muslim, but I believe in the dignity of Muslim friends. How can we connect with Muslims in order to work together? So obviously from both sides, we have here people wanting to reach out to each other. I think the best way, in my opinion, is to find a common ground, to work on common causes. Our sister Dr. Huda mentioned the common cause of social justice. This is a cause that is as Islamic, as Christian, as Jewish. It is a common cause for everybody with a faith. Social justice, and to protect each other, to have alliance. Today I gave the Friday sermon in the Plymouth church there, and I was really happy to see a big sign that they put on the front door of the church that says, love to your, between brackets, Muslim neighbor, what you love for yourself. And that is very nice, that we should be protectors of each other, and we should, as people of faith, protect each other's faith, not in the sense of necessarily believing in the other person's faith, but protecting their worship and protecting the right to worship. And after all, we are all, children of God in the Quranic or in the biblical sense. And therefore, finding this common ground will have to, from the Muslim perspective, perhaps, as well as the Christian perspective, will have to go from the rules and the details to the wisdom behind the rules and the principles behind the details. So to approach Islam in the principle sense, in the, what we will discuss tomorrow, in the maqasid al-sharia sense, in the higher objectives of Islam. Not the details of the rules, but the why of the rules. Because the details might differ. Allah said in the Quran, لَكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمَنْهَاجًا. We have made for each religion their way and their methodology. God is saying in the Quran. But people could differ in the details. But the general objective is the same. And these objectives could be a common ground for activity. Something in the news as well that touched me really, in Jerusalem, there was a recent ban on the adhan, on the Muslim call for prayers. So Muslims are not allowed to call for prayers in Jerusalem, the morning prayers, after 1,400 years of doing that. And today I read in the news that actually Muslims are calling for prayers from the churches in Nazareth rather than the mosques, because the mosques are not allowed to call for prayers, but the churches are allowed to ring their bells and call for prayers. So churches stood with Muslims to call for, and that is a protection of a basic right, to call for your prayers. And we should have ideas like that. Downtown Seattle doesn't have a place for prayers, and we prayed in the church today. I was really, really touched by the welcome of the members of the church who were there in order for us to pray. And they said, we protect you. Don't be afraid. Don't worry. I told them, I'm not afraid. There's no problem. No. We know that you're really scared. No. And no, we're not scared. I come from the Middle East. It's much worse over there. So, and the other question, how, please address, there's a verse in the Quran that says, you will succeed if you are a believer. How can we do that? Because, you see, if you are a believer, you will succeed, but you cannot be an inactive believer. You have to be an active believer. Yes, if you are a believer, you will succeed, but you have to be brave, and you have to embrace the principles of your belief. In the Quran, there is the group of believers who went to the cave, the people of the cave. They went to the cave and they died in the cave. They isolated themselves. They succeeded perhaps spiritually by dying in the cave as believers, but they never made it back to the town in order to make any difference, because they isolated themselves. Muslims sometimes act like the people of the cave, isolate themselves until they die in the cave. But in order to succeed as a believer, this is not a guarantee to succeed unless you're an active believer and you do your duty. So perhaps you take a couple questions.
I want to combine two questions that have been asked. The one is an authentic bipartisan leadership conceivable in the US from our vantage point? And then the next question, what should our course of action be if the new government does decide to make a Muslim registry? I think that probably what has been shown in this election is maybe that there's a limitation to a simple bipartisan system. I sometimes think that the United States was conceived in a time of checks and balances. The center and the periphery, the federal government and the state, the president and the other branches of government. And so maybe what we did was to do checks and balances. Sometimes it can be like a car that is driven with one foot on the accelerator and another foot on the brake. And so maybe this is a time to think fundamentally about how do we free up the system and not have, we in South Africa are trying to make all our elections every 5 years and not have elections in between, because a government needs to govern for 4 years and campaign only for 1 year. But if you have it every 2 years, you are constantly campaigning and governments are inhibited from making. So I would suggest, just from a South African point of view, I would suggest that we really think through how this would happen. And the only reason I have the temerity to say this to you is because I read a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to James Madison, who was drafting the US Constitution at that time. And Thomas Jefferson said to James Madison, remember, when you are drafting this Constitution, make in it a provision that it be amended every 19 years, because that is the span within which the generation who wrote it have by and large expired and a new generation have come into being. And so the point is, how do you upgrade the app? But that's your challenge. I will go back to South Africa and deal with our own problems there. But I think that until the powers that be have sorted out how to upgrade the app, I think what we are doing tonight is the duties of citizens. It is to say that there is a challenge and we are going to come together. And so rather than simply a bipartisan where we abdicate our responsibility to two parties, why don't we have a multi-party or multi-partisan approach in which civil society and religious groups and faith groups and everyone else actually just do what citizens must do to hold the government accountable and to advocate for the kind of changes and to stand in defense and protection of each other. And so I've been encouraged that in this moment that I have seen people saying, if this registry comes into place, then I'm going to register as a Muslim. Register me also. That I have seen tweets that are beginning to say, I am also Muslim. I've been heartened by a Japanese actor, an activist, who said, I was in an internment camp during World War II. I would not wish that on Muslims, and so the Japanese must be at the forefront of defending against those kind of eventualities. So I think that we are in a situation, we all know what must be done, but we all know that we simply need the courage to be able to do it. And this is a moment that it seems we are being pushed towards that, and we mustn't let this, in a sense, you know, we have a person in Cape Town who once said, if the water is boiling now, don't make tea tomorrow. I think the water is boiling now. So let's not postpone making tea. I want to say what can, and I think I've begun to answer the question, what can non-Muslims do to support Muslim brothers and sisters, I would say as a Muslim, my primary question is, what can Muslims do to support Hispanic brothers and sisters? What can Muslims do to support African American brothers and sisters? What can Muslims do to support the efforts of very liberal white brothers and sisters who fear for the Constitution? And then I think mutuality and reciprocation will be fairly natural. We will find each other. And I think that we must be encouraged that members of the police department are here because it says none of us have to act outside of the law. And we've got to distinguish, for example, just like we don't want Muslims to be collectively stereotyped, we also don't want the police to be collectively stereotyped. We must support the good, and we must be part of the efforts to hold accountable the bad apples. And then the last thing in that vein is that the Haaretz has published that a new Muslim Jewish Advisory Council has been formed between the American Jewish Committee and the Islamic Society of North America. What do we as Muslims need to do, and what steps can our local mosques take to inform us? I don't think exactly that a body has been formed. I know that there has been a tremendous outpouring of Jewish organizations. The Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, a range of others have come up. And the only reason that Jews have stepped up like that is because they saw the early signs in Germany and in Western Europe. They have seen how a caricature of a Jew, the hooked nose, the Star of David, innocently looking at first, joking at first, became a serious matter later. Every genocide starts with mocking. And so this is the time where we must draw from those in recent history have been the victims of that kind of anti-Semitism, that kind of Holocaust, and so forth. And we must be able to say, how can they speak more authentically to our fears? And so let's not get hung up on whether councils have been formed or whether it resolves the issues of the Middle East, Palestine and Israel and so forth. I think what we need to hold in perspective is that those who saw the signs and lived through the horrors of the outcome of those signs, that we need to draw on their advocacy at this moment in order to make the human case as we go forward. That really is all that we must do.
I would add quickly, yes, take it from your Jewish brothers and sisters, because they know tyranny very well since the days of the pharaohs, since I mentioned, all the way until the 20th century. So when they see that there's something that is dangerous that is happening, take their word. They know this stuff, and they've seen it in Europe, obviously. How to register as a Muslim, actually, from the experience of the Middle East, if this is going to happen, there will be some sort of a test that you're Muslim. What they do over there in order to differentiate people is to make them recite some surahs or give them some questions about the Islamic faith in the different countries over there, in the Arabia or whatever. When they want to differentiate people, they don't just ask them, are you Muslim? Go here. Are you non-Muslim? Go here. They will ask you a few questions. And in this case, you can come to the mosque and we will train you to answer the questions. I mean,
Okay. So my question is, the question I received is, how will Donald Trump's policy affect Muslim women wearing the hijab on or in their workplaces as well? I mean, unfortunately, women have always been the #1 victims. We've seen this in war, we've seen this in genocide. And they are visible targets with the hijab. They are visible targets. I told you, from Atlanta, Georgia, and just last week there was early this week, there was a teacher in Gwinnett County who is a hijabi in high school who had she came to her desk and she found an image of her with her headscarf and using her to basically tie herself and said, you can use your hijab. So it's very violent, unfortunately. We've already seen a lot of hijabi women, their scarves being pulled out, and there's violence. But so my question would be, though, so the situation is really bad. So my response is, what can we do when we see someone going through this? And I think this is the role that we need to play. If we see someone being a bully, or we see someone trying to remove the headscarf, or we see, you don't belong here, it's our role, wearing a hijab or not wearing a hijab, to step up and do something. And we don't need to be Muslims. We can be non-Muslims too, as well, to defend our sisters. And the second question is, how will you communicate, how will we communicate situations and opportunities for local non-Muslims to support and stand in solidarity with our individual Muslims and Muslim groups? And I think Ambassador Rasool, you already spoke a little bit about it. I think the best thing is local organizations, mosques, churches, synagogues. If it's in universities, I spoke about youth. Youth are unbelievably active and have so much energy. And so in a lot of universities, for example, in Atlanta, there's Georgia State University, where I am from, Emory, all universities coming together, all different Muslim student groups, and doing things and doing protests or discussing between different faith groups. So check also the university networks. Also, there's this amazing website. It's called MP Power Change. It was started by an activist, a Muslim activist, who actually marched to DC with a few of her other sister activists. It's called MP Power Change, and her name is Linda Sarsour. I encourage you to check the website out, and it talks about all of the local initiatives that you can engage with. And lastly, also to check ACLU, SBLC, and also CARE, the local chapters in CARE.
How should Muslims and people of other faiths reach out to those who were disenfranchised and supported Donald Trump? You know, Nelson Mandela taught us a very, very important lesson, and that is what we say in religion: love the sinner but hate the sin. That there is no reason for us to hate people. And in a very strange way, I think candidate Clinton put a label to a group of people when she spoke about the deplorables. It reminded me of Argentina in the era that brought Perón to power. The people who supported him were the workers, and they called themselves, and I hope I'm getting the Spanish right, Los Descomados, the shirtless. And they found a name for themselves. And so years ago, 25% of America who identified with a name, we boarded a summit at sea and entered Miami Harbor, and there were two 60-year-old white men standing at the gates of the harbor. The one held up a placard and said, "We are the deplorables." The other one said, "Now you see us." And in that message was a very simple communication to us, that it's important not to forget about people. It is important not to treat people as if they don't exist. And so we must become the champion of an inclusive America, whether it is urban America or rural America, because sometimes we get carried away with our urbanism. And we forget those who grow the food that we eat. Sometimes we live, as Haider does, in the Microsoft paradise. And we forget that because we've moved up the industrial change to the knowledge economy, there are others who have been left in the dust because industrial factories have closed. And so, what are our responsibilities to all of them? And so our fight is against bigotry, not simply Trump. Our fight is against alienation and marginalization, not against those who now self-identify as the deplorables. Our mission is to bring people back to the center, because Muslims know what it means to be marginalized, stereotyped, and profiled. And therefore we should have a natural empathy for those who have done a voting deed that now emphasizes that. And therefore maybe the antidote to it is to reach out and to find the divine in them as well, and to make them never feel that they need to have a protest vote against others that they don't understand. So I think that that really is the way in which we went forward, and that is why in South Africa we were able to find a formula for reconciliation between those who put us in jail and those who were jailed, between a Nelson Mandela and the F.W. de Klerk, between a black community and a white community. It's not perfect, but we work at it every day. And I want to end, and hopefully this, I think this is the last question for me. Someone once said that you can only embrace what you accept. You can only accept what you love. You can only love what you understand. And you can only understand what you know. And therefore, it starts with knowing. Let's not get to embrace yet. Let's do the simple act, as Huda quoted from the Quran, of getting to know each other. And get out of our cocoons, get out of our bubbles, get out of the communities who look like us, talk like us, pray like us, eat like us, and dress like us. Let's get to know others so that we can be in their shoes. That really is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Huda and Dr. Huda and Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool for answering those questions. And thank you all for coming. We are now closing our event. I would like to thank everyone, and also thank the sisters, the two daughters of our friend Nasir, brother Nasir, Asiya and Aisha, who collected the questions. Really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for coming. And I would like to invite Brother Mahmood, who's the president of MAPS, to close the event.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to thank all of my guests here who came on this Friday evening to be a part with us and be able to show the solidarity. Since after the elections, I have been getting enormous amount of emails of support from all my interfaith colleagues and friends in the law enforcement. Governor James Lee has called me very next day, assuring that he will not make Washington a state with the rhetoric that we have seen, and it means a lot for all of us. So we are very blessed to be in a community, which is so welcoming and forthcoming for us. As a closing remark, I also, would like to say that this is just the beginning of our interaction. Like many of our speakers have spoken here, that we really need to come together to fight for injustice, independent of whether it is a Muslim, non-Muslim, anybody from any faith or any minority. So we will start doing that work at MAPS. We'll reach out to our brothers and sisters in the interfaith, and we will further double down our efforts in trying to see the impact that we can create. And we'll also reach out to the other people who may not agree with us so that we can bring the hearts together. And I also want to thank the esteemed guests on behalf of MAPS community. We are so blessed to have them. And I want to thank Salman, who has been instrumental in arranging, and Brother Haider, to get this event together. Like we said, we never planned this event to be like this, but it worked out very good for us. And please continue to reach out to us. Many people asked how they can help us. So you can go to mapsredmond.org, our website. There are emails for you to participate in different activities, and you can reach out to any one of us, so we can work together for the upliftment of our community that we live in. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
brother. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. No, 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 no.